Association for Talent Development Austin Chapter podcast series, Humanity at Work, where we talk about how to bring humanity back to the workplace. Today's episode is about designing learning initiatives focusing on the human. Seems simple, right? Well, hold on to your hats, folks. It's not as easy as one would think. I am your host, Melissa Love, and today's episode is brought to you by Everybody Up. Everybody Up provides experiential workshops on leadership, employee engagement, and team building. My guest today is a doctor of philosophy who uses her smarts in industries of finance, real estate, healthcare, software development, and higher education. She has been a professor of not one, not two, but 3 universities. She currently helps authors and entrepreneurs build learning products that measurably transform people's lives. I'm super excited to introduce my audience to the one and only Alaina Szlachta. Well, hello, Alaina. I am so happy to have you here. Should I call you Dr. Alaina? You come with, just a ton of experience and education. So I don't want to disrespect your knowledge and all the years that you've put in there.
Well, thank you. I love that I'm here with you today, and you're welcome to throw in Dr. Alaina when you feel like it might be interesting in our conversation. But no, if I do go by doctor, I normally go by Dr. Szlachta, and that would only be when I'm doing like big important things like writing articles, speaking in presentations, or teaching at a university, which I no longer do, but hope to get back to one day. So Alaina is just fine.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious. At the core, you are a learning architect. You work with leaders to improve learning curriculums and learning experiences and making curriculum and the way it's delivered something that really sticks, right?
Yeah, I have started using this term learning product, and it's not something that other people use in the space that I've seen in L&D. And I like the idea of a learning product because when you think of any other product, like a MacBook Pro, which I happen to be on while we're talking today, MacBooks and all Apple products, they have a certain product development process, which includes marketing, and it includes customer success, and it includes the user experience of the product itself. And when we do learning, traditionally, we only focus on the learning experience, but there's a whole slew of other really important things that go into the learning experience, like before the learners even show up to the classroom, whether it's virtual or online, in a video or in person. And there's a lot of other really important things that we need to do after the learning experience, like reinforcement. And so we have in traditional product spaces, we have like whole customer success teams that are set up to work with users after they've purchased a product. But we don't have any post-training support that often comes after a learning experience. Like, it's very uncommon for there to be a super robust like retention and reinforcement program after the learning event. So what I really do as an architect is I create the blueprint, if you will, following that same metaphor. I create the blueprint of a product that makes sure that we incorporate learner readiness into our marketing initiatives, and that the learning experience also comes with a reinforcing program that makes sure that we're not just designing a one-off event, that we're truly designing an experience that actually causes a transformation, which is the whole point of learning anyway, right? So
right.
That's why I call myself an architect. And that's why I like to refer to learning as a product development process, because there's so much to be gained by thinking about the before learning experience and the after experience, which there's not enough of that going on, I'd say, in today's world.
I totally agree, because that's why when I do my workshops, I try to force as much as I can, force the leaders in the room as well, so they can understand it. And then I pray, because I haven't developed something like you have done. I pray that those leaders will encourage those same principles to be practiced over and over again, which is why I force them to be in there. But, most of the time it's just like, I hope it will stick. I hope it lasts. I hope that they can remember this. I hope they can apply it. A lot of hoping goes on. And I'm sure that's what a lot of other learning, architects have done over the years. It's just like hope.
Yeah. Well, as somebody in my life once said, flying on the hope wheel isn't going to get you very far. We
Right.
really do need to be very intentional
Right.
in, and that's why I feel like there's such an opportunity in the learning and development space that for so many years we've only focused on the learning event, this one-off thing like a big workshop. Or when I worked for the domestic violence hotline as their training director, we had this 60-hour training program, and now I learned that it's a 75-hour training
Wow.
program. But it's like, actually what's really really important is what happens after the training program, and how, like you said, managers get involved in reinforcing and making sure that those key learning, I don't know, information and skills and policies are being implemented in the right ways. So those are all things that we just have a lot of room for improvement, and hoping isn't working. And that's why, big picture, I think that's why we aren't paid as well as we could be, because oftentimes our work isn't tied to business objectives because the reinforcement's not there to show the relationship. So there's
Right.
so much more that we could be doing, and that's my mission as a business
Yeah.
owner in L&D, is to really change the way we all think about learning and design learning in all spaces. So
Right. Right. Well, and it makes me think of a lot of times we're talking about how we can even measure the learning initiatives, and
mhm,
that's about making it stick and making it really transform and change and make for positive behaviors and behavior changes
mhm,
that last the
mhm.
long term. And I
Yeah.
love the not one and done thing, which so many people think that it's just like, well, let's check that box. But
Mhm.
no matter who you are, if you don't apply the right technique and the right tactics and who knows what it is, to customer service, to, the call center, with domestic abuse, to even a professor, if you're not applying those things that you learn and you just like learned them and then like left the classroom, I mean, and that's why I feel like having leaders definitely part of those learning initiatives, so they're knowing how important it is and they're being reminded what those, just the foundation of what the organization stands for and what it's trying to accomplish in the organization's words, not how they've sort of maybe evolved it in their own brain and how they teach it to their, I don't know, it's just that sort of consistency across an entire organization that you just don't
Mhm.
find, quite
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
So,
think the reason for that is, like, we need more chief learning officers to be at the table when the big business conversations are happening, so
right.
that it's not just leaders being in the room to say, like, oh, we're a learning organization. See, I'm here with you too. It's actually more like, hey, we have a chief learning officer who's at the table with our chief operating officer and our chief technology officer and our chief financial officer. And we're all together making decisions that are working on behalf of the goals we have for the year or the quarter, and then seeing how learning fits in with each one of those business goals.
Right.
And that doesn't happen either often enough. So that's something else that I feel so fortunate that I don't work in a corporate space. I've actually purposely moved away from a corporate space because corporate is such a big ship. The way that things are done in corporate, even in higher ed, they're entrenched, and it's really difficult to make change, like really, really comprehensive department wide change. And I think that's what needs to happen to really see learning be tied to those key outcomes. But in the space that I'm in, it's the consumer space. So, Melissa, when you and I want to like improve our podcasting skills, where do we often go? We go to LinkedIn Learning, or we go to someone that's got a miraculously successful podcast and now they've got a learning product that's like
Right.
how to launch podcasts, how to be a great podcast host, right?
Right.
That's the space that I'm in. And it's really, really easy to make changes and be agile and to tie the learning product to the business results and the results that each participant seeks to change in their own lives, which is why they're showing up in the first place. So I'm really happy to be in this kind of newer space because I feel like I can make a greater impact more quickly than I ever could when I was in corporate. And a lot of what you're talking about with leadership, like our leaders are amazing, and there's different ways of thinking that can really improve learning outcomes. And we have yet to see that done in a really graceful, successful way just yet. So I'm hoping for it. Maybe I'll go back to corporate if those changes actually happen.
Graceful, interesting word. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. When we first talked, and you mentioned the topic you wanted to talk about, creating curriculum with the human in mind. I was like, what? Don't we already do that? And if we're not designing with the human in mind, then who are we designing for? And I'll tell you, I think it's the CEO, or it's the director, or the CEO, or the chief learning officer. I think that's who we're designing it for, and not really the end consumer, the end learner. So, what are you doing, and what can we do to sort of change our mindset as we build curriculum?
Yeah. So I listened to a podcast. Kudos to podcasts. I feel like it's the best way to just take in other people's ideas and successes and learn from their failures. Anyway, so one such person was on a podcast speaking about product development. Not surprising, I'm into that space right now. And he was talking about how a lot of technology platforms, some really smart people get in a room and they're like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if we had this platform that could do this, this, and that? Let's go build that really cool thing. And so what they do is they build a cool product, but they don't think about how the product actually facilitates some meaningful change. Like, why would a user use this product? Like, yeah, this product's got great features and it's got all the bells and whistles and it's super pretty, but like, what is it actually doing to facilitate something in somebody's life? Like, why would someone purchase the product in the first place? And so I think that also is happening in learning, that we develop a 60-hour domestic violence training because ultimately the grant funders need us to have a 60-hour domestic violence training that has these key things in it, because we aren't going to get our grant funding otherwise. So why do we have this particular training program? It's not because we want, this isn't true. I was the training director for the hotline, and so of course we wanted our advocates to be successful. But the metrics of what was included in that 60-hour training, they came from the grant funders. Now, the grant funders aren't necessarily, some of them could be survivors of violence, but probably none of them have been advocates that work with survivors. And yet they're the ones that are making the key decisions about what needs to be included in a training program for advocates to be successful with survivors. And so in some cases, there's a real mismatch there, or there's other agendas that aren't actually in service of the end user. And so I think that's the number one piece, is to make sure that we think through the user experience. And so that's like, who's your target audience? And why, what does a participant have to gain by engaging in your learning program, your workshop, your onboarding, and then actually engaging in that learning experience from the lens of the user? And then after you engage in the experience, does it actually facilitate the goal that was set out in the first place? And oftentimes there's so many opportunities for us to change our learning programs to make them meet those goals, because we're designing with a different kind of agenda in mind, which is not always aligned with the user experience or the user's end goal. So it's really in parallel. It's great to have a business objective. It's great to have bells and whistles and to meet grant funding requirements, but we have to also be paying attention in parallel to the user and what do they want out of it and what's their personal goal, and are those things in alignment as well. I would say that's the number one opportunity in learning, but also in product development. Like, there's, in my research and how product developers are approaching the way that they make successful products, I'm learning so much from them as I think through how to design learning like a product developer. And that's, I would say, a super important step. But the other thing, you said, who are we designing this learning for, if not for the humans, right? I think the other thing is that sometimes we get super excited about technology, and there's nothing wrong. Like, there's so many cool technology platforms out there, but we think the technology platform is going to like revolutionize the learning experience. It's going to be the answer, right?
Right.
And it's not. It's just another tool, just like Excel is a tool, just like the radio was a tool, and everybody thought the radio and everybody thought television were going to revolutionize the way that everybody learned. It's like, nope, they're just tools. They're just tools to facilitate human cognition and retention of information and application of that in real life. Like you said, if we don't have the right tools and the right content and the right components to facilitate real learning, the technology is not going to solve for that if it's not designed really well. So sometimes we design to just use cool technology, but again, we're not actually designing for the human and what it is that they want or need to get out of that training program.
Right.
So I would say those are the two things I've noticed in the time I've been in this industry.
Well, and as if you are a, hold on, I'm going to pause this. Hold on. Yeah. So as learning architects that maybe are where you used to be part of a department within an organization, within a corporation, and maybe they've been given the directive to, these are the things that it needs to include. This is how you need to do it. This is how you need to build it. This is how you need to facilitate it. But they listen to this podcast and they're like, yeah, what about the end user? What about those people that I'm actually teaching? How are there things, or is there a certain way they can approach it with the boss to say, this doesn't work because, how can we approach our supervisors in a way that's non-threatening? And, is there data that they should collect, or, it all depends on the supervisor, whether they're data or feeling driven or, whatever. But, do you have any tips for those people that feel like, maybe the curriculum that they're building currently is maybe going down the wrong road and it's serving one group of people when it really should be serving another?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a short story to answer the question, and then add a little more detail. So
Awesome.
When I was working at a corporate organization, I was helping them to write a super short presentation about time management. And it was working with a coach, and this coach worked with people to help them manage their time better. And the number one question that she always got was, people said, my boss is giving me more things to do. Like, I've blocked my time so I can get my existing workload done. But then when my boss or somebody else comes and asks me to do more things, my whole time management system is totally shot. What am I supposed to do? And you know what she said? I thought it was brilliant. She said, you need to, when your boss is there, or your peer, or your whomever is there asking you to take something else on, you can say to them, hey, here's my calendar, and based on our conversation about what I should be prioritizing, these are the things that we talked about were really, really important, and you're asking me to add this in. If I add this in, then something else on my task list or something else in my calendar, I'm not going to be able to do it all. So can you help me to prioritize? If you want me to add this thing in, help me to reorganize the other priorities so I can make sure to add this one in if this is a new priority. What can I let go of or postpone for later? And so it becomes a series of strategic questions. So it's not like, here's why this won't work. Because when my boss or peer comes up to me and tells me, Alaina, this isn't going to work and here's why, I'm not going to be as open to that. But
Right.
If somebody says to me, hey, Alaina, I see this data and I see this challenge here. Help me to connect the dots. How do I reconcile these things? And so it becomes a conversation and not maybe a difference of opinion. And so the way that I would approach that in learning, if someone's like, hey, Melissa, you're the lead of this new learning program, and we've already picked the technology for you. We've already picked the content. We want you to have these graphics and be this much time. Go, good luck. We need you to do it in about, we needed you to do it yesterday, but we'll give you about a week to do it. Like, often that's what happens, right? Everything's in a rush. So for the instructional designer, I would basically have the data already so that I know what are the business goals and what are my department's goals in relationship to the annual business goal. And then I would also know my target audience really well by having either done my own needs analysis or finding a needs analysis that's already been done by somebody else that's relevant, that says, like when I worked for Keller Williams Realty, my last corporate job, we worked for real estate agents, and our team had different real estate agents that we served. Some were new people, some were tenured, some were expansion teams. And so that was our target audience. And we should know, as instructional designers, we should know them really well. What are their pain points? What are they doing great at? What are their challenges? Where are they getting stuck? What kind of training do they already have? So we know inherently our target audience. And we also know the department goals, and we also know the goals for the entire business for the year. And then if someone is giving me a task, something that I need to be doing, and I know, because I know my target audience, I also know the business objectives, I know that they don't align. Then I can ask a really strategic question to my boss or to my team, and I can say, hey, this is the data we have in our target audience. They are really challenged by these things. And in this training, you're giving me a technology to use, but one of the big challenges is that this team or this target audience isn't tech savvy. And we're asking them to use a technology platform they've never been introduced before to facilitate this learning. And we have a goal of having 80% of our target audience complete this training. I'm really struggling to see how these things align. Can you help me? Right. And now it's a shared responsibility to figure out how do we, if we have to make this technology work, well, maybe we need to address the curriculum, or we need to do some micro learning to help them with the technology before we use the technology to facilitate the learning experience. So it becomes a conversation where everybody is accountable for meeting the needs of our target audience and meeting the business objective, and something has to give. We do have to be agile. We have to use strategic questioning in order to be able to be agile in the first place.
Awesome. Yeah, well put. I want to turn, well, now that you've mentioned micro learning,
yeah.
I love the idea of it. And we often cram so much info at people that nothing stands out. And can you expand on your ideas behind micro learning? Because I get it. I've read up on it. I get it. I'm fully behind it. So just give me your sort of philosophical approach to why you think it works.
Well, it doesn't work in all circumstances. And I also think that learning as a tool to facilitate change isn't always the right tool to be using either. Learning can be a really powerful tool, but in the instance of micro-learning, just as in the instance of learning as a tool overall, sometimes learning isn't the tool we need to make change. And in the same way, sometimes micro-learning isn't the right methodology to facilitate the kind of experience that people need for the outcome that we're seeking. And so I would be really clear before just like technology, it's so easy to jump on a bandwagon of the new fad. And I think micro-learning in the recent years has become one of those new fads that's popped up in the learning and development industry. And that's great. And there's an important place for both the new technologies we have and micro-learning as a tool, a methodology for delivering learning. I would be asking, well, how do we imagine micro-learning facilitating the objectives? And so there's some great use cases that I've seen for it. One would be like training at the time of need. If I'm a new person and I'm, let's say, a customer success representative, and I'm trying to work with a client to help them understand a certain platform, sometimes before I jump on that call with my client, I might need to be reminded about that specific feature that my client has questions, like, because they've already told me, hey, I'm really struggling with using this feature of my, Salesforce platform. Sure. So if I had a micro-learning library where I could go to that helps me to refresh what that feature is and how to use it and things like that, I could just do a 3-minute video before I jump on my call with my client that has those questions. Oh, and by the way, I can send that same micro-learning video to my client after our call. Beautiful example of how to use micro-learning. In the time of lead, it's short, it's sweet, it's not overwhelming, it's in the flow of work. Right. Another great use case would be in reinforcement. So we talked about like what happens after a learning event or a learning experience. So I just read about this new strategy of, they call it a 2, 4, 7, and 14, like the different touch points that we might have after a learning event. That might include emails with links to micro-learning videos, might be text messages with links to other things, but that we would send reinforcements 2 days, 4 days, 7 days, and 14 days after a learning event to help us combat the forgetting curve. I thought that was just brilliant. And so another great way that we could use micro-learning is, for example, if you're working with a sales team and the sales team, you want them to use certain templates with certain types of customers because we found those templates to be more highly successful. And I know that maybe people forget to use the template, or they forget to where they're located, I might send a reinforcer that not only has a link to the template, but a short video that's just like, hey, and this is how you can adapt the template. This is what we've seen our successful team members do to adapt the template to meet the client needs. It's a 1-minute video, a link to the template. Probably my sales team, who's newer, is going to be more likely to use the template and use it correctly and adapt it appropriately because of that micro learning refresher. So those are the ways that I could see micro learning being really great. But like a micro learning course that's only small bits of video, just kind of all piled together, I don't know that I would recommend that. I'm sure you can make an argument that's like, this is really great for this environment, but I don't think that just recommending a micro learning only delivery method for a course is going to be always the best thing to do. So really it depends on your target audience, their context, what they need. In some cases, adding micro learning into a larger learning experience is awesome. And in some cases, it's just not appropriate.
Right.
So
No,
I would always kind of, yeah.
I'm with you. I think that the micro learning really is a fabulous way to reinforce what has already been taught. Maybe you did have an hour long or even a half dayer that, was broken out into segments, and then you could create little like reminder videos in your micro learning library, as you called it. I think that's a genius way of, again, reinforcing what they just learned in a way that's really approachable. I'm like, I don't have to watch 4 hours to figure out what button it is that I push or where exactly those templates are kept. I can just go to this library and say, boom, boom, boom. Oh, okay. And then, I'm in and out in maybe 3-4 minutes. So it's just because I love anything that's productive and efficient. I love those things.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want it to be fast, but I want it to be efficient. So,
I could
but
also
sometimes
see
those
micro
things
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it being a super cool marketing tool. So, like, let's say you want to get people to purchase a video based course, or you want people to register or view an on demand recording of a live event. Maybe you pick out like the most juicy 1-minute piece of that larger video recording, you make that be a thing. And then you could actually put chapters into the large recording. And it's like, hey, this comes from this one chapter where we were talking about data analytics, let's say. And then here are some other chapters you might want to check out. And then people could click on the chapter within that larger video recording so that they don't have to watch the whole thing. They could chunk the pieces that are most relevant for them. And I think that's another micro learning methodology. It takes a little time to set up those indexes, but I think it's really valuable, especially in the flow of work, to get people to adopt, and maybe then they'll watch the whole thing or much more of the video than if you had just sent them the link to the whole thing. And it's like, good luck. Hey, here's this recording. And as I'm speaking, I'm like, we should be doing this here at ATD Austin, but it does take time to do the indexing and to do all those things. But it is incredibly valuable if you can take the time to do that for the user experience, especially.
Right. Everything takes time, especially if it's going to be done well.
Yes, for sure.
I love facilitating in person and experiential curriculum, but now that we had to change to a fully virtual classroom or a hybrid, somewhere in the office, somewhere at home, somewhere in the classroom, how do we juggle that, or how have you juggled that to really make sure that people are walking away with something that is useful and not so like fragmented? I feel happens like immediately. How do you pull those pieces together and again make for positive change?
Mm-hmm. So one of my clients is an acupuncturist, and over the years she's actually specialized more and more in working with women who are in menopause, and she's done so much one-to-one consulting and seen some themes in what causes hot flashes and what are the remedies for hot flashes and just the pain that women experience with hot flashes. And she's like, I could do so much work with a group learning experience that helps women versus only being able to reach one-to-one. There's a capacity for that. She can only do so much. But if she can create a learning experience that's personalized for women to help them to diagnose their own, like, what are my own triggers? And then what do I do about it? Because there's not a one size fits all when it comes to health. And so we are working together to do a virtual learning experience, but it's highly experiential. And how we're doing that is kind of flipping the idea of pre-work and post-work, which we know that term from even in-person learning. Go read these things and come prepared for your workshop. And then after the workshop, go do these other things and come prepared for your next workshop. But oftentimes, if you don't do the work, it doesn't matter because nobody talks about it anyway. So we're taking the same concept, but we're actually making it really meaningful. So imagine you have like an introductory class where you kind of get oriented and you get to know the instructor, you get to know the people in the room, and you learn about the next 8 sessions that we're going to meet in person. And by the way, they'll be recorded if you can't come, which is the best practice. But to make the most of the in-person or the on-demand version, we're going to ask you to do some investigation of your own body, because when you show up to the classroom, we're going to help you to interpret the things you've investigated. So, okay, I'll keep this as simple and not grotesque as possible, but each one of us has bowel movements, right? And when it comes to health, our bowel movements do tell us things, but how many of us know what our bowel movements are telling us? Probably nobody, right? But that's an actually critical thing to diagnose hydration or level of dehydration, or something like that. I could be wrong, but you get the idea.
Right.
And so when people are in the virtual session, they've already done some really meaningful pre-work. And if they hadn't done the work, they're not going to get the value of the live sort of coaching and information that's being shared to help them interpret what they're observing in their body. And
Right.
then once they've learned how to interpret what's happening in their body, we'll give them some personalized, okay, well, if you notice these things over these 7 days, that means this, and here's what you do about it. And if you notice these other things, here's why, and here's what you do about it. So it creates personalization, it creates accountability to get people to do the right activities to ultimately better understand their own bodies, as opposed to just telling people a bunch of information, which we often see in Zoom. Let's actually flip it and get people into action. And then they come prepared to learn just the right things that they need to know to then afterward now go implement these best practices for 7 days and then see your bowel movements and see how they may have changed.
Right.
And then if they haven't changed, why or why not? And so it's like really critical exercises and activities that people can do on their own with the right amount of training. Here's what you do. And the right amount of assets. Here's the worksheet to print or to look at on your phone. And then you check these boxes every morning, noon and night, or whenever, those things are happening.
Right.
So you get the idea, right? That it's
Right.
actually how do we design in a virtual or hybrid way meaningful exercises and activities that Kirkpatrick model for measuring and evaluating training. He asks the question in level 3, what are the critical behaviors that people need to be engaging for us to see the result? Well, if we're not actually getting people to practice those critical behaviors in a learning experience, how can we expect them to do them after the experience is over? Why not design those kinds of activities inside of the time that you're there to give people feedback and coaching and confidence? Right. So I think there's so much that becomes possible with virtual, and truly you could do the same model in person, but in some ways training becomes more accessible when it's virtual because we don't have to drive, we don't have to get babysitters, or maybe we just have our babies with us, right? It doesn't matter. Right. And so I really do like what the future might look like, but we do have to design differently, and I would say that that's true whether you're virtual or in person to get that experiential component.
Agreed. Well, Alaina, thank you so much. I'm going to change to our rapid fire segment of questions. And
so my bowel movement conversation got us to rapid fire. I see where this is going.
I love it. I was not even thinking about that as a transition, but if you want to connect those dots, you can. All right, cool. So a couple questions just to end out this this interview. So what do you think is your biggest workplace fear? Even though you work for yourself, you still have to work in other places, other people's workplace. So what is your biggest workplace fear?
So I would say this is true both working for myself and when I've worked at other organizations, is I'm terrified of workplace silos and fragmentation, where even as a consultant, if there's not a culture of interconnectivity among departments and teams, and a sort of cohesion around how everybody's working together to create a business objective that is the same for everyone, usually profit. If there's not that kind of cohesion, you can ultimately be doing something that's really, really great in your silo, but somebody else is doing the same thing, or somebody else has already done it, or that priority is no longer important and you don't know because you've been working in a silo. And so at the end of the day, nobody wants their time to be wasted.
Right.
And that goes whether I'm a consultant or an individual contributor at a corporation. And so I believe, and what I've seen over the years is silos really, really are so inefficient. And there needs to be really, really great interdepartment communication so that everybody's work products are all working toward a same goal, and it allows you to be more agile. And so I'm fearful of silos.
Yeah, no, good point, because I find that when I have worked in the corporate world, I could spend a whole week on something, and then there's a little piece of information that's like out here in this other department that completely changes the trajectory of what I'm doing. And then I just wasted half a week, and then I just throw things.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Lived it, did not love it. What is the biggest impact someone else made on you at work?
So there's a woman I worked for right out of undergraduate. I was 21 years old, never had a job, 9-to-5 job, and her name was Terry Axelrod, and she was out of Seattle, and she taught me how to be a professional. She basically helped me to organize my time, how to even navigate my inbox, and when I was struggling with meeting deadlines, how to prioritize things, because so often no one teaches you, like, we think everything is urgent, everything is important. And when you're in that mindset, you don't know how to take a step back and go, wait a minute, that's not true. Someone kind of has to tell us and help us and hold our hand a little bit. And then when that muscle gets stronger and stronger, we can do that prioritization for ourselves. And so I really, truly, to this day, some of the things I learned from way back my first job because of Terry Axelrod, I have these time management, project management skills that I credit to her, and just greatly appreciate the impact she's made.
Awesome. I love it. Love her name too. What is the one thing you can do every day to make a positive impact on the people that you work for or with?
I love when I just had a new client call actually before our conversation today, and I started the conversation just asking and allowing someone to imagine, like, where are you at today and where do you see yourself? Like, where do you want your business to be, or what goals do you have for your future? And letting people kind of imagine and step back and reflect on that. And I find that, my intimate partner, my friends and clients, like, hearing people tell their stories, not only does it help me be of better value as a partner, as a sister, brother, friend, or consultant, it allows me to be a conduit to help somebody take the next step, or maybe a bunch of major steps to meet those big goals, and filtering everything that I do from that particular lens, I find is really valuable as a consultant and as a friend. And so I think that's a way that I can make an impact, not only in prioritizing how I support someone, but just letting somebody speak. How often do you have someone ask you, what are your goals and where are you at? Where do you want to go? And how can I help you get there? I love those conversations.
Yeah. Well, and everybody's got a story. Everybody has a journey and they're, at numerous places in that journey, and just letting them, have a little bit more space, psychologically safe space, to tell that story of how they got here and where they need to go next. And just, again, allowing them that space and that openness, like, I'm listening, right now you're a priority to me. And I do care about what you have to say.
And it's also, it's okay to not know. I think so many of us don't want to talk about our future goals because we don't know what step to take next. And the reality is nobody really knows, and that's okay. But when you're listening to someone talk about what they want, where they are, how they got where they are, what they want kind of in that distant future, people will always share with me ideas that I had never thought about, perspectives I hadn't thought about in that way before. And we can do that. And maybe, someone doesn't exactly take our advice, but it inspires them to take a next step they wouldn't have taken And because of that conversation, we get to make an impact. So I love those things.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Dr. Alaina, thank you so much for being with us here today. I thank you for your time. I know you're joining us from India, even though you head up the chapter and programming for Austin, Texas. And you're on a very special project there in India, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So again, thank you so much for being, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you for your time, Melissa Love. And until we get to speak again, I look forward to doing that.
Awesome. That is today's episode. I would like to thank you, my listener, for your time, and our guest, Dr. Alaina, for her contribution to the show. Look out for our next episode on tdaustin.org. Be sure to like our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. If you would like to be featured on this show, send your request to me at podcasts@tdaustin.org or reach out to me on LinkedIn.